Okay, hello and welcome to show number 14 from the Hive. And our topic for today is to talk about well-being and asking the question, is well-being a bandwagon? And if it is, should we get off? So Lorna, do you want to kick off? Because I think this was something that you've been having some debates about.
This came from a Twitter thread from a chap called Nick Court, who runs a business called the People Experience Hub. And he was asking the question, this feels like a bandwagon, it feels like everyone's shouting about it, but it feels like platitudes. Is it really the most important thing as we move out of COVID? I can see why public health and well-being is important in COVID, but really, are there not lots of other things we need to focus on now? So I think what he was getting at was it's starting to get the way that, the best way that I can think about it is it's starting to get the way that engagement got in the years following the McLeod report, whereas everybody went, yes, this is a problem, and gosh, no, it doesn't feel right, does it? And here's some evidence, and now what do we do about it? And at that point, it became a bit kind of, we'll do a charity bake sale, or we'll do a survey, and it became a bit linear in the way that people dealt with it, whereas actually it's quite a complex problem. So I don't think it is a bandwagon, but I do think it's become a bit woolly.
I think it's interesting. It's easy for it to appear like it's a bandwagon if you think of it in the wrong way. In the same way that I think engagement, it's easy to see it as was easy to see it as a bandwagon if you think of it in the same way. If you think of well-being as a tick box exercise, something you do, then it's easy to see it in the context of the latest big thing. And if it's the latest big thing, ergo, it's a bandwagon. But actually, as we've all talked before, and we all know, it is a much more complex thing than that. Lorna talked about the similarity with the engagement debate, and obviously you've been involved with Engage for Success since the year dot. Do you recognise that analogy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was saying before we started that I think that it becomes a bit of a bandwagon when people start saying, what's the next big thing, or do we need to change the name? Does it really say what we want it to say? And it just sort of completely takes away the focus on what the issue was in the first place. It almost works on the basis of, we've cracked it, therefore we need to move on. And we know with engagement that no way has that generally been cracked. And I think sort of well-being's much the same. And you said about cake sales and all that sort of stuff. People, I always think, with the wellbeing thing started with we give free fruit to our staff on Fridays.
Apples on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. That tick.
Yeah, yogurt at lunchtime.
Exactly. And when I've ever gone and talked to companies or spoken about wellbeing, I think I'm always very disappointing to them, because I don't talk about those things at all. I always talk about strong leadership and treating people well and things like that. I don't talk about like medical things or health and, step challenges or any of those sort of programs that get put in place. And it's really funny for me, because some of the wellbeing piece is engagement, and that is leadership. And it's the same thing, isn't it? But it's all different for it. So maybe it is a bandwagon, and maybe it's not. I don't really mean that, if anyone's going to quote me. But maybe a lot of it is the same issue, the same principles, the same solutions. It's just all been given different names and different exciting, sexy sort of programs
to turn it into a shiny new toy.
But it's still fun.
And I think the risk is now, of course, that this is where equality, diversity, and inclusion comes.
Becomes the next shiny toy. Yeah.
And I was talking, it's really interesting, I was talking to Sarah, who we had on the Hive a few episodes ago. We had a catch up before the weekend, and she was talking about a business that she knew that do temperature check tools. It's technology for temperature checks, and they've got one for mental health, and are talking about how do we develop that in other areas, including potentially inclusion. And I think this is part of the challenge, is there's lots of people with really good intent wanting to try and solve these challenges, but businesses by their nature, we just like nice simple solutions. We like a Gantt chart with an action on it, and if that action is every Friday fruit gets delivered, we can go tick, we've done well-being. You know, once a quarter we'll do a charity bake sale, and once every 6 months we'll do an engagement survey, tick, we've done engagement. And we run the risk with some of these big complex problems which are replicated in society as well as within organisations, don't they?
They become too big for people to feel that they can cope with, but we have to break it down into little pieces that we can tick a box. It's really interesting, actually. The week before we had the lockdown, I was chairing the employee wellbeing conference in London. In fact, it was the day after Joe and I were at the NEC at the Health and Wellbeing at Work, and there were a number of speakers on that day, and of course the topic was employee wellbeing. And what was really interesting to me is that the recurring theme of that day, from speaker after speaker after speaker, was that wellbeing is not apples in a bowl on a Friday. It is something that has to be absolutely integrated with your organisational culture. It has to be supported by your organisational values. You have to live and breathe it and behave in a way that is aligned with a culture of putting employees' wellbeing at the heart. And so it does involve leadership. It does involve culture. It involves line managers, people managers. It involves, and this comes back to a recurring theme of our Hive conversations, having a range of offers that appeal to people as individuals. So, you know, Lorna might like to go on a virtual run on a Friday for 20k, and I actually
I'd love a virtual run. That'd be amazing. Yeah, I'll do that.
The actual running that I don't want to do, I don't mind thinking about it.
I might like to be given some help with mindfulness or something, you know. And horses for courses, treat people as individuals.
I think also, and I was just thinking as you were talking through it, I think what you're getting at is it's everyone's responsibility, and it needs to be in the system of the organisation, don't just have a head of wellbeing or a head of engagement or a head of diversity and inclusion. It's everyone's responsibility. And the obvious one for me is IT. It's all very well saying your well-being and your productivity are important to us, but if you've got IT systems that don't work together, it takes forever to log on, it's a nightmare trying to get stuff done, you're wading through email and everything seems to be done on email, you've got all these tools but they don't really help you do anything, that's additional stress. That's actually impacting your well-being. And unless your IT head, CIO, whatever, is as focused on well-being as a priority as your HR head and your CEO, those I call them micro stressors, because they kind of exhibit as micro stressors in your day-to-day, right? It doesn't really matter whether you've got free fruit if it takes you an hour to log on every morning.
By the time you get to the fruit bowl, you're going completely mad. Yeah,
an orange isn't going to help you there. You need a better laptop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to that thing about, you know, ticking the box, also there's so much focus on output in terms of measuring things. So people are expecting to tick off that something's been done. And I often think what's better, and if you think about it in lots of other things like, I don't know, marketing your business and things like that, measuring what you'd call your lead indicators. So the things that you know have an impact. You might not be able to see what that impact is to be able to tick it off, but you know that, for example, if you talk to everyone every day, one of the engagement enablers that we talk about in Engage Success is an engaging manager treats people as individuals and they regularly coach them. So if you talk to your people every day with a coaching sort of mindset, you know, we know that has a great impact. You might not be ticking off at the end that they've improved their performance or that they're feeling better or that their well-being's improved or whatever. You can actually tick off that you've had a conversation every day with someone. So sometimes it's not even that we shouldn't be, you know, ticking the box, but let's tick the box on the right things, which we know are going to drive the right sort of behaviours, which will ultimately have that impact.
Yeah. One of the things that worries me a little bit is with all this COVID-19 thing, I think there's a risk, or do you agree with me that there might be a risk that well-being becomes equated with physical health and physical well-being and physical safety, and that people's focus is entirely around the well-being of my people in terms of not letting them get ill in the workplace, or or not letting them get overstressed from working from home, maybe potentially, but it simply becoming a little bandwagon of that to the exclusion of all these other wider issues.
I think that it could well be the case. I think it's been such a focus for us all, understandably, for 4 months, and it will continue to be, there is a real risk of that there's people. I saw awful on LinkedIn the other day, somebody I'm connected with, his son, I presume from how he positioned it, committed suicide, or that's not the right phrase, is it? Took his own life. That may not have been around COVID or being locked down or working from home or any of those things. It may have been about a load of other stuff that was starting to become really publicised. There was so much talk about mental health over the last year or two, and particularly young men, and those sorts of issues, and some of that is still happening because of lockdown, but actually there's a whole load of stuff that's nothing to do with lockdown, and it doesn't feel like that's being focused on in the same way. And so it could be, as you say, that we sort of get swept off on this bandwagon now, if you like, and then that goes away, and we have to start again with a lot of the other conversations that we're getting some real traction in terms of looking after people.
So we could say then, could we, Lorna, that well-being in its proper sense isn't a bandwagon, but there is a risk of well-being becoming a bandwagon of the wrong bandwagon if we think of it in as just this narrow thing.
And maybe this is a fault of mine and not a strength, right? But I just really struggle to go in the world of people in HR, which is where I come from. I really struggle with the Ulrich approach, which is there's little boxes for everything, and they don't need to touch each other. That so you've got wellbeing, engagement, and operations, and ER, and policy, and learning, and
you're sort of horizontal across the lot, aren't you?
Unfortunately, I do like to be horizontal, Joe. So I struggle with that. Let's jump from one thing to another thing as a focus, because actually, if wellbeing is important to you as an organisation, and your policies have that in mind, for example, you can't have a really draconian absence management process that's got underlying assumptions about people swinging the lead and a priority about presenteeism, and also then try and launch a mental health first aider program and think that all you've done is tried to cancel those out.
Yes.
Whereas if you maybe had a more progressive approach to managing absence and ill health in the organisation, and thought about presenteeism differently, you wouldn't need your mental health first aiders quite as much.
No. And it is so complex, because having a head of wellbeing or a head of engagement or a head of diversity, you can argue, puts emphasis on it and gives somebody the opportunity to say, hang on a minute, have we thought about this? But it exactly does what you say. It silos everything and pulls people away from looking across everything all the time, and it makes it someone else's responsibility. So it's so, as all of this stuff is, it's so complex and so difficult.
We need to see it as a holistic thing. On that note, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you. That was great. We obviously had a little extra guest on our recording then, which was my dog, but that's one of the joys of lockdown recording. The doorbell rang, the dog goes ballistic. So, but yeah, holistic approach. It's not a bandwagon, unless you want to treat it as a single issue topic, and it clearly isn't. It transcends the whole of an organisation's approach. So lovely. Lorna, Joe, great stuff as always. Thank you, and thanks for listening. Bye bye.